Hello, and welcome to the Pragmatic Live podcast series, where we tackle the biggest challenges facing today's product management, product marketing, and other market and data-driven professionals with some of the best minds in the industry. I'm Rebecca Kalogeris, Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Pragmatic Institute, and your host for this episode. Today, we are joined by Jim Semick, founder and chief strategist of Productplan, a software that helps thousands of product leaders develop and share beautiful strategic product roadmaps. Jim is passionate about all things product and entrepreneurial, and he's a well-known speaker, a writer in the field, and we are thrilled to have him back on today. Welcome, Jim.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. It's great to be here. I'm excited to be on the podcast with you.
Excellent. Now, Jim, I know every year at Productplan, you guys do a survey, sort of the state of the union in terms of product planning and product roadmaps in the industry, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've been conducting this survey for about four plus years now, and every year the survey results become better and more incisive.
Awesome. And I know that roadmaps are just, there's something as a product manager that you're always thinking about. What is my plan for the near term? What is my plan for the long term? So I just thought it would be great if we could dig into some of the trends that you're seeing and the best practices and share kind of those insights with our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do that. Well, I could tell you a little bit about Productplan and a little bit about the people that we survey, the product managers that we survey. Would that be a great place to start?
That would be great. Give us all some context for the results we're going to hear.
Absolutely. So Productplan has been around since 2013. We develop product roadmap software. We also have features that help with product prioritization and features like that help product managers decide what to build and also to be able to communicate their strategy. And as a result, we're able to interact with thousands of product managers across companies around the world in all different vertical markets, in all industries. And so we're in a unique position where we have the access to a lot of leading edge product managers in the way that they're doing road mapping, the way that they're conducting their planning, the way that they're interacting within their organizations to help sell the strategy. And this last year, we conducted a survey and had over 1,300 product managers in all different industries giving us insights into their planning and prioritization methods, how they plan, how they communicate. And we're really excited to share those results. And people can download their own copy of the survey by going to productplan.com. And I can cover some of the report highlights or we can make this a conversation, whichever way you want to go, Rebecca.
You know what? Let's talk through some of the highlights, right? I think one of the things that I really like about the way you guys think about roadmaps and the way you talk about roadmaps is it's not just an asset at the end, right? It really is the embodiment of the strategy, and building the roadmap is part of how you define and share the strategy. And I think that is really how people should think of that at sort of an elevated spot. It's not just the document at the end. It is, what is my product? Where is it going? And why is it going there?
Exactly. Yeah. And product management is so challenging, and anyone listening to the podcast that is a product manager that's living it day to day, that you have 1,000 different items to be working on at any given time. You're being pulled in all these different directions, and so as a result, planning and prioritization it often takes a back seat to putting out fires. And so what we found in our latest survey is that about a third of product managers say that their biggest product management challenge is planning and prioritizing. And it's really getting the time to be able to do effective planning and prioritizing versus some of the ad hoc decisions that we make, especially if we're in planning meetings and there's a loud voice in the room. And so getting ahead of it and doing more long-term strategic planning is an ongoing challenge for PMs.
So let's dig right into that sort of planning and prioritizing, because I do think it's such a big challenge. How did your survey uncover typical ways people were using to prioritize, methods that they use in prioritization?
Yeah. We actually asked that survey or asked that as a survey question. And the way that product managers, I'm looking for the results right now, and the way that they prioritize is using a variety of methods. And I'm looking at the report right now, and we didn't actually ask the question about which method that you use,
Okay.
but we, based on our experience, product managers use often a weighted scoring model to do their at least their some sort of quantitative prioritization, and then they layer in qualitative customer interviews and so on to help with those final decisions. So often product managers will use some sort of a effort versus cost or value versus cost scoring framework. And that is where you pit, you take different opportunities that you have and then weigh it on a matrix of items that are low effort but high customer value. Those obviously get prioritized as low hanging fruit, and then there are some higher effort items that have higher customer value that you wind up prioritizing. So product managers tend to think in that framework when they're having their prioritization meetings, and then they layer in qualitative customer insights in order to make those final decisions. And there are a whole variety of different ways to prioritize in different models. For example, RICE. I also mentioned the weighted scoring model. That's one way of doing it. So there are a variety of ways to do it, but ultimately, product managers tend to prioritize using this value versus effort framework.
Well, and I think there is the art and science and the negotiation skills of prioritization, right? You want an unbiased way of viewing. There's also a little bit of knowing your market enough to know what might need a bolster. And then, of course, there's all the loud voices of customers and other sort of stakeholders, and how do you balance that all out?
Exactly. And then there are the long-term strategic objectives for the organization. So that fits into it really well. And a lot of PMs really understand the need to have that long-term strategic vision when they're prioritizing. But unfortunately, we're all pulled into this trap where we're on a customer call and the customer is saying, I really need, this particular feature, for example, especially if you're in, B2B software. And so that's really difficult to resist that, especially when you have someone who is, they're depending on you to deliver a particular feature, or maybe a deal it rides on delivering a certain feature, yet you have the long-term vision that maybe that isn't the highest priority. So it's an ongoing challenge for PMs.
So in that you're so focused on the today, but you need to go look at long term. What range of time do most of the roadmaps that in your survey or that people that you work with, how long are their roadmaps looking out?
Yeah, we've over time we've noticed that the duration of the roadmap is reducing. What we found is that most PMs, around 30% of PMs, have a roadmap timeframe between 4 and 6 months. So if you add all this together with PMs that maybe have a roadmap of a month or 2 to 3 months, you're talking about around 50% of PMs are planning 6 months or less into the future. And I think that's a really, that's a great trend that we're seeing. So the days of having these long-term roadmaps of a year or 2 years out, I think that people are realizing, especially in this age of agile software development, that those roadmaps that you're planning 12, 24 months out, those are a work of fiction. There's no way that you can either predict what you're going to be working on or delivering, and more importantly, market conditions change, competition changes, your view of what is valuable to customers changes over time, and so that has to be revisited really often. So I'm glad to see that these roadmap timeframes are reducing.
Well, and it's an interesting point too. Again, we are agile, markets change, competition changes at such a high rate these days in technology. So how frequently are people updating their roadmaps?
Yeah, they're updating them really quite often. In an ideal world, at least your prioritization is something that you're looking at daily or weekly. Now, the roadmap itself and what you communicate out can be longer. But what we're saying is that 69% of product teams are updating the roadmap either monthly or weekly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's fairly often, and that's I think that's a great trend. Some PMs that we speak with at Productplan are updating those roadmaps almost daily, at least one of the roadmaps in their portfolio. So some PMs will be responsible for a couple of different roadmaps, and as they meet with their engineering teams, those priorities are changing.
But I think that's another great point to maybe dive in on is the sort of multiple roadmaps, because I can see, and you're looking at the details with your development team, you'd have change at a very high rate. But obviously you don't want to change your sort of story and vision that you're sharing with the market on a weekly, daily basis. So let's talk about how they're balancing those and the different roadmap types that you're seeing organizations and product teams build.
Yeah, that's a great question. You bring up a great point that in a lot of organizations, there is not just one single roadmap. What we're seeing is that product managers create different views of the roadmap based on who their audience is. So the executive team, for example, needs a different view of the roadmap and maybe a different duration than the engineering team. So the engineering team might be more short term, it might be more granular, and maybe there's certain things that aren't important for the engineering team to see in order to understand where they're headed in the next few sprints. But the management team needs that longer term perspective. They need to understand the longer term themes that a product manager has and how that ties into the strategic vision for the company and for the product. So PMs will actually create different versions of that roadmap depending on the audience, and then of course some of our customers share out the roadmap with their customers, and that yet needs to be another view of the roadmap. And maybe there are certain things you don't want to promise to your customers and show them in the roadmap. So that's what we're seeing as a trend, which is kind of getting the right roadmap for the right audience.
Well, and I think it's interesting because one of the things in your report that surprised me at first was that it said the vast majority of product managers spend between 1 and 5 hours per week managing the roadmap. Mm-hmm. And not that they wouldn't want to, I was surprised they were able to, but I also think that part of that is the frequency at which we have to change today and the number of roadmaps, and thinking of roadmaps both as long-term vision and shorter-term plans with development. Then that makes, I think, a lot of sense.
Yeah, definitely. And we're seeing this, we are seeing a trend of spending more time on the roadmap, and what they're spending their time on isn't necessarily building the roadmap. It's not, putting nice boxes onto a presentation. It's really about, it's about scoping. It's about having these conversations with the engineering team, having the prioritization conversations with executives and stakeholders, and that's part of road mapping as well. And of course, gathering the information, prioritizing, that's part of this road mapping time as well. And so what we found is, they're only about 10% of product managers say that the most time-consuming part of road mapping is editing the roadmap. Right? That's not the big thing. And the highest value that a product manager can bring is in planning and communicating what they're going to be building.
So let's talk a little bit about the tools people use to build their roadmap. No doubt, I know the preference for tools for you and the automation software, but how popular are some of the product roadmap software being used? How many people are still relying on spreadsheets or the dreaded Microsoft project to manage their roadmaps?
Yeah. Well, we've seen a trend towards more PMs using more dedicated road mapping and planning software solutions. Over the last 4 years or so, I think the PMs are becoming more and more aware of these tools and software products to help them with their job. But by and large, the number one tool that PMs use are presentation software like PowerPoint and spreadsheets and so on. So those are still very much in use. And what we've seen is that some PMs will adopt a solution, a product management solution, and then still supplement it with spreadsheets for additional information. And of course, our mission at Productplan is to displace Excel spreadsheets and Google Sheets altogether, because we feel like there are such better tools out there for PMs to do their job. But still, by and large, it's presentation software and spreadsheets.
So it's always a noble goal in life to try to replace Excel and Google Sheets, in my opinion.
This is a long-term aspiration.
Right. But I also think that when you use the right tools, that presentation layer becomes more integrated with the whole process and less of that add-on you have to do at the end, which does enable you to make it more fluid and to have different views, because you're not having to sort of manually manipulate all of those things, at which point you just run out of time. So I think the right tool can really help, not just with the presentation, but also with the planning.
Absolutely. Yeah. And PMs don't need to be spending their time manipulating spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations. They need to be engaged with stakeholders, having conversations.
Yes. So how satisfied are people with their road mapping process? Is there a lot of angst or pain points that you hear in this area, or overall is that, what parts are satisfying and what parts are frustrating?
Yeah. I think people are generally happy. What we found in our survey is that happiness goes up as you use dedicated roadmap software, and it tends to go down as you move into standard project management software, and then you move into spreadsheets, and you move into presentation software. The satisfaction of that planning process actually reduces. So what we found, and I'll be completely transparent, that many of the people, not everyone, but many of the people, the PMs who completed the survey, are Productplan customers. We're able to tap into our base, as well as through other methods, getting a lot of other PMs who aren't part of our ecosystem to and maybe using other products that we would consider to be competitive. So I think we do get a pretty broad range of people completing the survey, but there is a percentage that are Productplan customers.
And I suppose that probably does have it shows an even higher level of people using road mapping software than there might be in the actual marketplace.
I think that's probably true. Yes. Yeah.
So what other big sort of trends in terms of roadmaps are you seeing these days, whether in your survey or just from working with all your different clients?
Yeah, we've noticed over the last couple of years there's a nice movement towards objective-based roadmaps, or roadmaps that are theme-based, or maybe have some sort of North Star metric as part of it. And product managers are slowly moving away from time-based roadmaps, or they're creating roadmaps that have a time-based element for one audience, such as executives, and then they have more of a Kanban style roadmap or list view style roadmap for a different audience. So they might be using, actually creating these different style roadmaps based on the audience. But what we found is that even if they have a roadmap that contains no time frames and is just showing the prioritization of what they're planning, executives still need a timeline-based roadmap. They still ask for, what are we doing in Q3 and Q4? And that tends to be the way that they think.
It's hard not to have. I mean, I get while the dates are an issue, right? Because they look like promises and there's so many changes and pieces. But it also is hard to plan the whole organization around if there isn't some level of clarity on timing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so we think that way of communicating the roadmap, at least by quarter, for example, that's here to stay for quite a while.
Yes. And again, that's particularly important for things that are sooner. When we get further out, those can be a little more nebulous. But the idea of sort of featureless and moving towards objectives, I think, or in pragmatic, we would talk about what problems are we solving, I think is a really smart way too of keeping people focused on the problem and not the specific solution, that can allow us to be more fluid and to leverage new technologies and new skill sets internally to address that problem in the right way at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. If your roadmap is based around problems, or it's based around that North Star metric that I was talking about, now your battle with the stakeholders in order to convince them that your strategy is the right approach, it's not as difficult, because you can answer why you're doing something, why you're proposing a certain feature, and roadmaps really shouldn't be this hodgepodge of features thrown together onto this roadmap. There needs to be some theme around why you're doing each one of these items, and the PM needs to be able to communicate what you're not doing as well, because we all know that we can be building 100 different things, but we need to choose maybe 5 or 10, right? So the other 90 or 95 items aren't going to get built, at least not yet. And so a PM needs to be able to communicate that. Why aren't we doing these things? And so that's where an OKR based roadmap, or a roadmap that's objective based or theme based, or problem based, makes so much more sense. It makes it easier for a PM to do their job.
No, I totally see how the industry, how that makes sense for organizations as they're trying to stay sort of on top of the competition and on top of the market. Anything else that you're seeing in roadmaps, or that's either common or maybe something that used to be common that isn't occurring as often?
Yeah, I think that PMs are sharing their roadmaps out more frequently. They're becoming more transparent. It used to be that the roadmap was this artifact, right, that was created and then shared among the executive team, and now we're seeing a trend towards sharing your roadmap, and sometimes even this living roadmap that changes weekly, with sales and marketing, with the engineering team especially, and so it's not just restricted anymore to executives. It's now being shared much more broadly across the organization, and I think that's a fantastic trend.
Oh, I think that is great. And I also think the more people in the organization who have a clear view of where we're heading, the better. So that's exciting.
Yeah.
Jim, we talked about a ton of different stuff, and I definitely encourage people to download the roadmap from productplan.com. I will also put a link, whichever link you want to put, I will put into the description here to make people find it, because I think it's really, really interesting. And I think roadmaps are so important part of enveloping and sort of the whole strategy, and being able to show that you have a plan and communicate that plan effectively to get buy-in. There's few things as important as that we do.
Yeah, definitely. And product managers can download the report at productplan.com/survey, and they can get a free copy and see where they stand.
Awesome. All right. Anything else you want to leave our audience with as they're thinking about their roadmaps? And, it's that time of year where you're thinking definitely end of year planning and budgeting. Anything you want to leave them thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. I advocate communicating really often with your stakeholders, and not just simply delivering to them what you think is this final roadmap. The roadmap really should be a conversation. And so if you're starting to plan for 2020, now is the time to be conducting those meetings with your stakeholders and getting alignment around what the different options are, and soliciting feedback and educating them on the strategic goals that you're shooting for, and helping educate them about what's going to deliver real customer value.
Thank you, Jim, for joining us today. It was great to have you on, and hopefully you'll come back and join us again.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. It was great to be here.
All right. Okay, that does it for today's episode. Thanks, everyone, for listening. And don't forget to join us next week when we tackle another great topic designed to help you elevate your product, your company, and your career.